the great ideas. And on Monday evening, we did hear, on Tuesday evening, we did hear from philosophers. But on Wednesday evening, we heard from a historian, we heard from a faculty member from Government and Foreign Affairs, and a theologian. Last night, we had the great good fortune to hear from someone in literature, someone in the arts, painting, and someone in music. So we have looked at the great ideas from a number of different perspectives. Now, that term, the great ideas, really issues out of the tradition of the great books. And the person who is responsible for this tradition of the great books of the Western world, he wasn't alone, but he was a prime mover in the development of it, was Mortimer Adler. And while we are focused on the great ideas, we couldn't do it without a great and profound indebtedness to Adler. And it gives me great pleasure this evening to introduce to you a gentleman who is actually a protege of Dr. Adler's, worked with him for many, many years, and we just came from dinner. We had dinner with students, and he's just a fountain of anecdotes and marvelous stories that we hear about Mortimer Adler. And if you don't know very much about Mortimer Adler, you're about to. And he is someone who made the claim that philosophy, like health, is everyone's business. It's true that there are some who become professionals in the healthcare industry, but everyone needs to be concerned, involved in learning about his or her health. Well, it really is the same thing about philosophy, that all of us live by values that are themselves an expression of ideas, and usually great ideas. And so, while Mortimer Adler, who passed away at the age of 98 in 2001, he may not be with us in body, he surely is in spirit, and as a kind of continuity, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you a Mortimer Adler protege, a gentleman who was a product of great books, education. I hope I don't embarrass you. His erudition is so impressive. Makes me feel really stupid. Because he knows about any subject, because that's what the great books are. Ladies and gentlemen, William Cathers.
It's such a great pleasure and honor to be here. As a young boy growing up in Columbus, Ohio, I envisioned the day later in life when I'd be in Canton, Ohio, giving a speech. Yes, you inferred properly, and that would be at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, after playing quarterback with the Cleveland Browns and leading them to 7 or 8 world championships. But, as Adler teaches and Aristotle teaches, a good life is one lived according to virtue and good fortune. And I had the good fortune that my life took a different turn. And today, I get to talk to you about things that are really important. And I wouldn't trade this speech for a talk at the Football Hall of Fame or any other Hall of Fame, because these are the real goods of life. And so that was my good fortune to get sent in a different direction. And I want to say also that you made me think, John, about Dr. Adler when he was a young student at Columbia University. And he had the great Mark Van Doren as his teacher. And Mark's youngest son, John, asked Mark Van Doren, "Do you think Mortimer is a genius? And he said, I don't know, but he causes genius in others. And so, if I can speak on these, it's because this man, Mortimer Adler, took a dumb jock interested in nothing but winning football games and got me excited intellectually. And I think it can happen to anyone. We are philosophers. Man by nature desires to know. We are philosophical animals. Adler says the only question is whether you're going to be a good philosopher or a bad one. But you are one. And so I want to talk a little bit about his thinking and what an extraordinary teacher he was in exciting us about these ideas. And when I was, I live in Los Angeles now, and many years ago I was just a starting teacher in high school, and I was getting ready to watch some pro football games on Sunday, and Firing Line with William Buckley came on. This was a famous show. Buckley, a very conservative intellectual, and he had this Mortimer J. Adler on. This was many decades ago. And they began this discussion, and Adler would listen so intently, the best listener you had ever been around. I mean, be careful what you say. He's listening. Most of the time we can sit and talk and it doesn't matter. We can say dumb things, contradict ourselves. Everybody else is just waiting for their turn to talk, right? They're not paying that much attention. He's paying attention. And Buckley would talk, and Dr. Adler would listen and nod his head, and I would think he's going to say, I agree with you. And he'd say, no, Bill, I think you're wrong about that, and here's why. And he'd tell him. And then Buckley would come back and say, well, what about the following? And this went on for an hour. I don't think they ever agreed one time, but their disagreements were clear. It was an intellectual tennis match. I have never learned so much by listening to a conversation. And they got done, and Buckley said, oh, Dr. Adler, it's such a pleasure to have you on. Would you please come back? Why, of course. And he was his #1 guest. Had him on, I think, 48 times during the years. Wow. And they said, why was he your best guest? And he said, because he could explain things so well. And I think that was an act of love on his part. He worked hard to explain things to us. And so he would take things like Aristotle for Everybody, one of his books. And it says, difficult thought made easy. He said, difficult thought is difficult. Really what I did was make difficult language easier. Let me not talk in special language. Let me put it in the words that we use every day. And I think that was his care for his fellow man, his care for the educational system, his care for this republic, that he would work so hard to explain things to us. And so I think that was just a great attribute of his. And I watched that show, and he was talking about teaching. And I was a teacher, and I thought, this man has forgotten more than I'm ever going to know about teaching. I need to talk to him. Where is he? And I found out he hung out at the Aspen Institute in Aspen, Colorado during the summer. I didn't know what the Aspen Institute was, but I knew it was closer than Chicago. And so I went up to Aspen. I called information. Do you have a telephone number for Dr. Mortimer J. Adler? They did. I sat down and I hesitated. I was intimidated. Now, if you'd watched me play basketball, one of the things you know is I did not get intimidated easily. If you watched me play football, I did not get intimidated easily. I grew up on Woody Hayes. We don't get intimidated, we attack. But I was intimidated because I knew this is serious. Let me gather myself. I called the number and he answered the phone. I said, Dr. Adler, this is William Cathers. I run a program for at-risk youth in the city of Los Angeles. I'm trying to institute some of your reforms in education, and I'm in Aspen, I'd like to talk to you. He said, well, let's see, I go to the dentist in the morning, I get back, I'll see you at 9:30. I'll give you 1/2 hour, don't be late. Here's the address. He gave me the address. I said, Dr. Adler, I've never been to Aspen before. How would I find this address? He said, you'd buy a map. That's how you'd find it. I liked him immediately. You know, I'm from Los Angeles, La La Land, have a nice day, all this two-faced stuff. Hey son, the town's only 8 blocks long. If you're not smart enough to find the house, you know, and you don't have the initiative, well, I found the house. And I was there early. And I came in and walked right up and knocked on the door, and he greeted me graciously. He came in, and I said, I have a series of questions I want to ask you. That was another act of good fortune. He hated small talk. He loved real talk. Okay, like we were doing at dinner tonight, right? We didn't have small talk at dinner tonight. Okay, we had great ideas talk, and boy, he would sit and he loved that. He never got tired of that. And so that was great. I only had a half hour, so I had serious questions to ask about teaching. 2.5 hours later, his staff is getting very concerned. There's a U.S. senator waiting to see him that they keep on hold, and he keeps waving him away. And finally I said, Dr. Adler, I said, I need to go. The senator's waiting. He went, we have plenty of senators. You're a teacher. Brings tears to my eyes. You're a teacher. Ask your question. Now, how many people, powerful people in the United States, that is their conviction? He says, that's our public servant. He can wait. Okay? I was a high school public teacher in the inner city of Los Angeles working with expulsion cases. Ask as many questions as you want. And that's how it started. And then he continued to mentor me. I became an Adler scholar at the Aspen Institute, coming and studying with him, personally helping with any kind of lesson plans, how to teach. Went on then, I realized I got to go to graduate school at St. John's College, a great book school where I can study these great books. And that began this association with this great man. When he passed away and we had a memorial for him in Aspen, I was talking and there's another man, Jim O'Toole, was talking. We were saying, he was the most patient man I've ever met. That stunned people. They said, that curmudgeon? That guy is really impatient. I remember Jim O'Toole said, now some of you wealthy people think he's extremely impatient because you have power and you have influence and you think you know all the answers. So you thought he was impatient when he was bothering you. Okay? But he was really patient. Look at the way he writes these books. Look at the explanations. He takes his time. Aristotle, for everybody, he would write that book, and then he'd read it with his 11 and 12-year-old sons and say, do you understand this? And if they didn't understand it, he'd go back and try to rewrite that chapter again. Now, students, you think about when your teacher makes you rewrite an essay 2 or 3 or 4 times. Okay? He's going to go back, and we say to our teachers, the teacher says, well, I'm not sure what you're trying to say here. Well, you know, I know what I'm trying to say. It doesn't matter that you understand what you're trying to say. It's do other people, and that is really an act of love. Because, as Aquinas says, love is the concern for the welfare of another. And that's why teaching is the greatest act of love. Because nothing benefits another better than you teach, that you help, that you empower, and especially when you empower with the kind of moral clarity that Dr. Adler had. And so we continued on. I developed this program for at-risk youth using the great ideas, and it had tremendous success. And I began doing consulting work. I continued to run an education program in the inner city of Los Angeles, became a moderator at the Aspen Institute, working with top executives that would come there in a free market society. He said, you wield tremendous power, and you need to know what your moral, intellectual, and social responsibilities are running those companies. I was sharing at dinner that when he retired, we went up to this huge house on the side of the mountain up in Aspen. There are lots of them. They're people's second, third, fourth home. And I could tell this gentleman really admired and loved Adler. And I like to ask these rich, powerful people, why do you love him so much? Because many of them did not love him. They wanted to get away from him. And he said, well, it's very simple. When I was building this house, he said, I was taking a seminar from Dr. Adler, and I said, hey, come on up, I want to show you my house. And I took him around. It was a huge place, and he was showing him these rooms, and Dr. Adler started to get upset, and Adler looked at him and said, who's going to use all these rooms? He says, I just kind of laughed and moved on and showed him other things. I got this Italian marble that I brought in here, and I've got this big private theater room in here. He says, stop, you didn't answer my question. Who's going to use all these rooms? Boy, could he ask great questions. The Socratic method. Let me ask you a question. Because Dr. Adler would say, at Plato's Academy, they studied every subject. There were no majors then. You did poetry, literature, theology, politics, Euclid's elements of geometry. You discussed them all. And you had problems you were trying to solve. But the problem that they discussed most often, the question they asked most often, the one they thought most important and difficult to solve, was what makes a human life good? What makes it worth living? And what must we do not just merely to live, but to live well? The flourishing life, eudaimonia, Aristotle's ethics. It is not enough to be born, die, satisfy certain desires, and not understand what a flourishing life is about. And those were the questions he'd asked those executives. And that man looked me in the eye and he said, Adler looked at me and said, get me out of here. He says, and we walked out of that large house I was building, we got in the car and we drove back down to where he was staying, and he didn't say a word. And as we arrived, he said, he looked at me before he got out of the car, and he says, you know, you got as much wasted space in that mind of yours as in that mausoleum of a house you're building. He didn't mince words. He says, and you've managed to do one thing in your life, make money. That's not much of an accomplishment. But it's not too late to do something meaningful with your life. And if I were you, I'd think about that. And he got out of the car. So this gentleman thought about it. And so I'm going to do something with these rooms. Starving young artists, young physicists at the Physics Institute, people who are doing meaningful, important things, I'm going to give them a room to stay in. Virginia Woolf's great essay on women don't have a room for themselves. They don't have a room where they can go to, where they can think, where they can be by themselves, a room of one's own. I'm going to give them a room of one's own. And we will fill these rooms. And this house is going to be used for something. Because he asked me, who's going to use these rooms? And I knew the answer was no one. I'm 3 times divorced, estranged from my children. This is my 4th home. The answer was no one was going to use these rooms. And he knew how to ask that kind of question. Because Plato starts us off with Socrates telling us the goal is to become self-aware, self-correcting, and self-fulfilling. Who's going to use these rooms? And with that, he made him become self-aware. He had to become self-correcting and then self-fulfilling. So that kind of self-awareness, I think, is desperately needed in our society today. We see what's going on, and this pursuit of knowledge, this pursuit of wisdom is something that he was very concerned with. When I started my school with these at-risk youth, that he had explained to me, you have 3 goals. You have to prepare students to make a living in a free market society. We all know that, right? You got to go to school so you can get a degree, so you make a good living, so you can buy a house, so you can do these things. He says you have to prepare them to be thinking, responsible citizens in a republic. And you have to know a lot of different subjects. And you have to have a kind of a Renaissance background if you're going to vote and be responsible. Well, we kind of know that too. He says, but the third and most important reason in all of education is that you lead a moral, good life. You find out what makes life worth living and how do I flourish. What is a good, moral, meaningful life? And that is the third and most important task in schooling and education. And I would explain that to young men and young women in my program, and that interested them. That interested them. Their own happiness in their life interested them. Not, you know, we need to do something with you because you're a bother to society. We need to have a place where we can put you because you don't fit in. You got to make a living, you got to do these things. But that idea that the main thing we're here for is to understand what makes a human life good, what makes it worth living, and what must we do, not just merely to live, but to live well. Well, Dr. Adler, what do I do with students who can barely read? You discuss the great ideas with them, and this book I lived in for a while, the 6 great ideas. Truth, goodness, and beauty, ideas we judge by. Liberty, equality, and justice, ideas we live, ideas we judge by, ideas we live by. And I would go over this book, and I would just take out a little passage, a simple idea, and I'd start the discussion with these students. And we would have these Socratic seminars that you're going to see in a moment, and it was the way to teach through this type of conversation. Now, one of the things that I want to share with you is that on these name tents, I have on the back from Adler's How to Speak, How to Listen. And I always do this in seminars, whether I'm training executives or dealing with high school teachers or students. And on the back it has, do I understand you to say blank? So in a discussion, before, Dr. Adler says, before you can agree or disagree, you have to understand the other person's position. Not like we do it. I'll sit while you talk. Is it my turn yet? Or like I describe talk shows today, not Buckley and Adler. Today it's from the right, I'm an idiot, and I am going to interrupt and shout for the next hour. And from the left, I'm an idiot, and I'm going to shout and interrupt for the next hour. And none of us will create a clear rejoinder because we get thrown off the show and not invited back. Because this is sort of like professional wrestling. And they make ratings off of this, and they sell advertising off of this. But that's not what I saw with Buckley and Adler. I saw, do I understand you to say the following, Mortimer? And the follow-up question, and the reasons you hold this position are. And so, as we discuss with one another, I'll try to model that. So, your position is the following, and the reasons you hold that position are the following. We do that with our author. We want to know what are Adler's positions, and what are the reasons for those positions. And just like Adler and Buckley, Adler says clearly understood disagreement is a great good. Clearly understood disagreement is a great good. Here's your position and why. Here's my position and why. And we now understand our disagreement goes around your second reason, and now we're clear. And the conversation has a chance to move forward. Of course, Adler says clearly understood agreement is even a greater good. Is even a greater good, isn't it? Okay? But boy, clearly understood disagreements helps the conversation to continue. And then I would see that in my students. I would see in my students they had clearly understood disagreements. They like to disagree and fight. Now they were setting that aside, and they had clearly understood one another. And then 3 weeks later, suddenly a student would say, no, I don't think that way. I'd say, why not? They'd say, well, I was thinking about what one of their colleagues had said, or I was thinking about the reason. I was giving this more thought, and now I think my position is the following. So Dr. Adler would say, as I will say to the students right here, when you enter into a conversation, you shouldn't change your mind too quickly. Okay? You You might be someone who just likes to agree and get along too well. Don't change your position too quickly. But don't stubbornly refuse to ever change your position. When do we change our position? When we clearly understand someone's position and the reasons why, and we think that's reasonable. That's insightful. I'm going to consider changing my opinion. Not too quickly, but not stubbornly refusing to. He's just brilliant at describing it in the simplest terms. And he says the power of that, of course, is we are talking in this book what truth is and what is truth. This is two different things. What truth is and what is true. So we will talk about self-evident truths. We will talk about truths beyond a shadow of a doubt. He says, but most of the opinions we have, they fall into there's a preponderance of evidence. If I get some other evidence, I could change my opinion. So we have the questions that he's posed. What is truth? And then how would we pursue truth? And he would say that the pursuit of truth is a cooperative venture. We need to discuss and listen to one another. We need to listen to various artists. The thing, though, that I remember the best about Dr. Adler was his ability to impact people from all walks of life. In 2001, one day I was in my office in LA and I was working. I was very busy. I had lots of deadlines, but I couldn't focus. And suddenly, I sat at the table. I'm in a high rise looking out over the city. And I picked up 6th grade ideas. And I was reading chapter 19. And don't know why, just was drawn to do that. And the phone rang. And it was Amelia, Dr. Adler's caretaker. And she said, he's gone. And I was sitting there reading chapter 19. Now, when they came to get his body, a young man walked in. Gracious young man. He was talking to Amelia. And he saw all these pictures of Mortimer Adler. He saw the great books there. And this young man, working class his whole life. And he said, oh, was this gentleman a fan of Mortimer Adler? She said, it is Mortimer Adler. He stopped. He said, he was a great man. He'd read some of these books written for the everyday person. He said, I will make sure he is treated with the respect that he deserves. He went outside, he got the other men together, and he explained, this is a great philosopher. This is a great man. This is what he meant to me. And they carried him out like Socrates' death scene. Isn't that wonderful? When I came down here, I had a driver driving me down, beautiful drive today, and I was on the phone talking with somebody, making some arrangements, and we were talking about, he said, well, where are you, what are you doing? I started talking about Adler and the great ideas, and the driver said, excuse me, I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about that when we arrive. And so I showed him 6th grade ideas. I gave him my card, He says, I'm an educator, I'm a pastor. It fascinates me what you were talking about. And so I just thought, there's Dr. Adler. From university student to PhD to CEO, we all have something in common. We are human beings with the same human nature. Man by nature desires to know, Aristotle said. By nature, we are social and political animals, and we're going to get into that. Dr. Adler says you've got to know human nature, and that is where we find these common values that we can live by. And so I think that his work is more important now than ever. I want to touch on something I'm going to follow up on tomorrow, and that is the great ideas, objects of understanding. And I've written that many universities in the West would at best describe discussions of the great ideas as quaint, or at worst, dangerous and delusional. How does the epistemology of Mortimer J. Adler, epistemology is just comes from a Greek word, it means knowledge, the theory of knowledge. How do we know things? How do we know things? How does Adler's theory of knowledge address these criticisms and defend our discussion of the sixth grade ideas as actual pursuits of knowledge and understanding? And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to touch on that just a little bit now, more tomorrow. But if you want to find out more about that, that is Adler's Most Common Philosophical Mistakes, is a wonderful book. Or The Intellect, Mind Over Matter, The Intellect, Mind Over Matter. Those will go deeper into this. Now, I'm here today on behalf of the Center for the Study of Great Ideas, an organization that was started by Dr. Adler and his dear friend Max Weissman. And this is in memoriam to Max. Max was a great friend, great philosopher friend of Mortimer Adler's. Aristotle says there are three kinds of friends. There are friends that we have because we have the same pleasures. Children are like that. You play Legos, I play Legos. We're friends. I get tired of Legos, you don't, we're not friends anymore. Adults are like this. I play golf, you play golf. We're golf buddies. I decide I'm not playing so much golf anymore, maybe we're not buddies. Or it can be we're drinking buddies. I don't drink anymore. We're not buddies. We share a pleasure, and Aristotle says those pleasures can come and go, they can change, and therefore that friendship, it doesn't have much endurance. Then we have utility. We call that networking today. I have lots of friends on LinkedIn and Facebook, and if it's business, like this might be good for business, then that is utility. We can benefit one another. Aristotle says that's fine, just as long as it's not dishonest, and that happens in business all the time. We're good business connection. He says, but that doesn't have much endurance. Then there's the friendship based on the good. There are two people who understand the difference between apparent goods and real goods that he's talking about. And you've decided to pursue the good in life. I've decided to pursue the good. Let's say all of us in here are convinced by Adler's book that the good life is the happy life. That is not, well, you gotta stop being happy and be moral. Why? Well, I think you gotta do that to go to heaven when you die, or something like that. Okay? Adler says, no, it makes you happy. Happiness is virtue. Virtue is the means to real happiness, real flourishing. And so you become convinced of that. You become convinced that a lot of unhappiness in your own life may be because of the things he's identified. And so then Aristotle would say, we have a chance to become good friends based on the searching for the good. And so if you say to me, Will, I don't think that's right what you're doing, I would say, why do you say that? Because we have the same end in mind, to seek the good. And then we talk back and forth, and that is stable. As long as we don't give up the pursuit of the good, we are good friends forever. And it is stable, and it is edifying. And that's the kind of friend Max Weissman was to Mortimer Adler. They were good friends because they sought the good together, and they sought to share that with people online. Mortimer hated all that technology. Max said, no, we've got to get out there amidst all of that and have this conversation and give that choice to people. And so I want to keep Max and his wonderful wife Elaine, and we know when we lose good friends, we suffer. We suffer when we lose good friends. But it is much worse to not have good friends. To have shallow relationships and you don't miss them when they're gone. I just get another golf buddy. Okay? That's not good friends we suffer over. We grieve over. But it is worth it because we cannot live a flourishing life without them. Now, I'm going to talk more tomorrow on what Adler says and fasten your seatbelts. Ideas is not quite the right word. I say the great ideas, the great books, but it really should be the great objects of thought. They're objects of thought. Because today, we think ideas are in our minds. You have an idea in your mind, and I have an idea in my mind. He says this was one of the great mistakes made in modern times. And in his research of all of these thinkers, he found in St. Thomas Aquinas, in the Summa, I think it's part 1, question 85, he said he found this interpretation where St. Thomas explains to us how the mind works. And it has to do with ideas are objects. It's fascinating. Ideas, St. Thomas says, are that by which we apprehend objects. That by which we're not conscious of our own ideas. We're conscious of the objects that our ideas present to us. Now, perceive me right now, all right? You're perceiving me. And what happens in modern thought is, starts with Hobbes, Locke, the only thing you're aware of is your own perception. Aquinas says the only thing you're aware of is the object of your perception, Mr. Cathers, and this stage right here. That's the only thing that you're aware of. Aquinas would say, Adler would say, just focus on your percept. Just focus on your percept. No, it's completely hidden from you. It presents an object to you. Now tomorrow, you can remember being in here. And you could say to a colleague or a friend, what was that Mr. Cathers was saying? Well, I think he was saying this. Yeah, or you could say, yeah, you remember that blue tie that he was wearing? No, it was kind of a red tie. And we'd say, the memory just is that by which you recall an object. When you imagine something, an image is that by which you bring the objects back in front of you. And concepts are that by which we place objects like mathematical objects or truth, goodness, and liberty in front of our consciousness. Now I'm going to come back to this tomorrow, but I just want you to think of this extraordinary claim. We all think we have ideas in our minds. And he says those ideas are instruments by which we place objects in front of our consciousness. And that is why we can discuss them. And he goes to great steps to say, I can show you how truth is an object, a conceptual object that we can talk about. How justice is a conceptual object we can talk about. Now, we are going to disagree. You might say this tie is green. And you'd argue, and finally you'd say, are you colorblind? Well, yes, I am colorblind. And we might then begin to examine what the real color is, you see. So your perception has some subjectivity to it. Your memories, of course, have subjectivity to it. We can misremember. And so the key thing that he's talking about is that it places some objects in front of us. Now, tomorrow I'll go into that a little bit more. But what's the key? Objectivity. There's an object outside of us that we can discuss. That doesn't mean my opinion is accurate of that object, seldom is, or yours. But we can start to discuss what we think is the most accurate interpretation of that. Now, ideas are not that which we apprehend. So the idea that I have an idea in my mind, an idea in your mind, that's what we're going to try to get away from tonight. I'll go into this a little bit more tomorrow when I talk about the object of thought of freedom. Freedom as an object of thought. Dr. Adler did about 4,000 pages of research, hundreds of authors in the history of Western civilization. And he said, when they use the word freedom or liberty, synonyms, when they use that, they're usually talking about 3 different kinds of freedom that all share something in common. He touches on that in 6 great ideas, goes in depth on it. And the philosophy of the Western world has been talking past each other, whether it's are we talking about political freedom, or are we talking about freedom of the will? What are we talking about when we talk about freedom? Some people have freedom is the ability to do whatever you want. Adler would say, some say that. Dr. Adler would say, do whatever you want. He'll talk about doing what people need. And so I just want to keep that in front of us right now as objects of thought. Now, we have objects that are sensible and objects that are intelligible. And intelligible are these concepts that we have. Moderns say we only have sensible objects. That's the materialism and the positivism of scientists. The only thing that exists are material objects made out of molecules and atoms. And rejects the idea that they're intelligible objects. Well, if you've ever done Euclid's geometry, all right, a triangle you don't draw. If you draw a triangle, you don't understand. You can't draw a triangle. Euclid has a point is that which has no part. A point is that which has no part. As soon as you put a point down on your paper, it has a part in it. You draw that with your mind. A line is length with no width. A triangle, he does proofs for any triangle. I have a proof for any triangle. Draw a picture of any triangle. Draw a picture of infinity. Draw a picture of an n-sided regular polygon. And so one of the things that we learn in mathematics is in geometry is that we have objects that are pure concepts. And yet, we use it to describe physical phenomena. We use it to build these computers. Why are these intelligible objects? What is their relationship, these mathematical objects, to the real world of matter? And if you answer that one, you'll be the most famous philosopher in history, because they've been working on that one since Plato. Adler says we have other purely intelligible objects: justice, liberty, goodness, equality, but they have a relationship to reality. And what is that relationship? And so these are difficult ideas for us. I just want you to know when somebody says, oh, those great ideas, those don't exist. He's got volumes defending on the theory of knowledge how this happens. Objects that are purely intelligible, like I said, mathematical objects. The objects of thought are the great ideas. So I've given you enough right now, but we're going to think of the great ideas as the great objects of thought. And that when the students are talking about truth, or self-evident truths, or the difference, or what do we mean by liberty, or what do we mean by equality, or what do we mean by happiness, a very complex concept, happiness. Very serious business, happiness. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We are not clear what that concept means in the United States. When Jefferson wrote happiness, in that sentence, we know he meant Aristotle's concept of happiness because we have his copy of Aristotle's Ethics. And happiness was a moral term, had nothing to do with what you feel or want. Happiness is a whole life, well-lived, accordance with virtue. It is something that we can pursue together. Very serious topic. Now, another thing to keep in mind is why truth, goodness, and beauty? Because what you think about truth, goodness, and beauty impacts almost what you think about almost every other concept. See, what you think is true and false, and how. What you think is good and evil, and why. What you think about justice will impact almost every political thought you have. Now, there's one idea in his Syntopicon of 102 ideas that is the most powerful idea. Dr. Adler said, what you think about God will impact what you think about every single other idea. Okay? It impacts everything. But truth, goodness, beauty, liberty, equality, justice, I mean, they fan out, they interconnect, and thus, understanding that connection, they shed light on each other. And then, they shed light on our understanding of reality. What is the connection of mathematical objects to reality? But what is the connection of these great ideas to reality? And Adler says they shed light on it. They allow you to understand it. You can take the findings from science. You can take the findings from other areas. You can synthesize those together. And these concepts help us to make sense of reality. Now, there's a wonderful book called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Dr. Oliver Sacks. He's a neurologist. He was an atheist. He was a materialist. Only thing that matters is matter and atoms. And he's dealing with people who have bad neurological pathologies. And he was a great follower of David Hume, the great intellectual of the Enlightenment. And David Hume says there's no such thing as these concepts. Truth, goodness, beauty, justice. There's no such thing. You find books like this, burn them. Throw them on the fire. Go to the libraries and burn them. This is superstition, this stuff. And then Aristotle would say, and Adler would say, when you perceive this chair, you're perceiving and conceiving at the same time. You have senses that come in, sensations that come into your senses. But you can't know what kind of thing it is without this conceptual ability. And this man comes to him, and he can't figure out what's wrong with him. His eyesight is perfect. He hands him a rose. He can describe it perfectly. Well, it's elongations. It has these planes enfolding upon themselves. He describes the rose. He says, well, what is it? He does not understand what kind of thing it is. He says, smell it. Ah, a rose. He has agnosia, conceptual blindness. Adler says we perceive and conceive at the same time. You can catch that on your own in time. But through pathologies, we can see people who have conceptual blindness, this ability we're not supposed to have. And Dr. Sacks can't understand what's going on, and finally the man gets up to leave, and his hat's over there, and he goes and takes his wife's head and tries to put it on. He mistook his wife for a hat. Dr. Oliver Sacks says, I wonder what David Hume would say to this. I have patients living in a Humean nightmare. This is the modern idea in epistemology and psychology that defines what a human is, how we think, how we understand. And Adler looked at those case studies, and let me say again, Dr. Oliver Sacks was a fan of Hume, but he saw the suffering of his patients. He saw the pathology. And so you will see in the most common philosophical mistakes by Adler, intellect, mind over matter, where he will go through these things in detail. And it may be something that you're not interested in. Dr. Adler say, you know there are moral values. You know the key is deciding what they are. You know there's such a thing as true and false. It's trying to decide what's true and false that's difficult. Dr. Adler would say in some of those books, you may wonder why I'm going over this so painstakingly with you. Writing this many decades ago. He says there is no philosophy that is too weird or too bizarre that they're not teaching it in universities to your children right now. They can come home with this stuff and get A's on their papers. Listen to me. This is the arguments that go on in epistemology or the theory of knowledge. Now tomorrow I will go through an examination of one idea, freedom. and we'll look at the analysis and how people think about it in different ways, and I think that'll be helpful for us. But here is the Aristotelian point of view on our discussions of things. It is necessary to call into counsel the views of those of our predecessors in order that we may profit by whatever is sound in their suggestions and avoid their errors, Aristotle. So if you think in the great books, Adler saying, wow, those were the good old days. They had it all right. That's not Adler's position. Adler's position is the following. Okay? We examine the past to see what insights they had and to avoid their errors. Okay? And why? Because Aristotle said the investigation of the truth is in one way hard and another easy. An indication of this is found in the fact that no one is able to attain the truth adequately, while on the other hand, we do not collectively fail. But everyone says something true about the nature of things. And while individually we contribute little or nothing to the truth, by the union of all, a considerable amount is amassed. And Aristotle's not saying that to be PC. He's not saying that to be polite. He's saying, logically speaking, in the pursuit of truth, everyone has something true to say about the nature of things. And so when we're discussing up here today, that's what we're doing. It's cooperative, it's collaborative. Very difficult readings that we have, but one student might have one insight here, and another has another insight here. Dr. Adler said, when you read a difficult book, you got to read it 10, 12 times just to begin to understand the complexity in it. But if all of us read it, and we get together, and you provide one insight, you provide another, we can come out of the seminar with the understanding that it would have taken 10 times on our own to accomplish. And so we are really pursuing the truth. And Adler wanted to be in discussions with people who disagreed with him. He wanted to be on the panels with professors who disagreed, just as long as we just get a clear understanding. I said to Dr. Adler, Dr. Adler, if I told you that I have 10,000 people down here in an auditorium who all think you're wrong, and a panel of, and his eyes started to light up, and a panel of professors who think you're wrong about everything, but they'd like you to come down and join the panel and speak. His eyes are lit up like, oh, make this come true. I said, you'd want to be there. He said, of course. The rest of us might be shy about that. He said, would I get a chance to speak? I said, okay, yeah, they won't today. You might get shouted down. No, you'll have a chance to speak. I'll give them a chance to speak. Okay? Because I might learn something too. I saw him at the end of his life, late 80s, doing a seminar with high school students. He was doing Sophocles' Antigone. And they were discussing the nature of tragedy. What is tragedy? That's what we want to get at here. Not just, we're not going to go over the details of the play, and he didn't care to pronounce the names correct. I mean, he's reading it in Greek. But this is not an academic endeavor. It's a great ideas discussion. It's about our lives. And this one young lady, she said, oh, I don't think that's what tragedy is. Her name was Buffy. She was a cheerleader. Buffy, the cheerleader, said, nah, I don't think that's right. He says, well, what are you saying? She said the following. He said, well, let me see if I understand what you're... Buffy, do I understand you to say the following? Uh-huh. And why are the reasons that you hold that position? Well, what about this? And what about that? And what about this? And he just sat back. And he said, well, Buffy, you really made me think about that. After the seminar, the teachers were there. He'd do the teachers, their students, and then the teachers could ask him questions and he'd review it on the seminar. Dr. Adler said, well, I thought I knew something about tragedy. I mean, he's read all the Greek tragedies in Greek. He's taught them for 50 years. You know, I thought I knew something about Greek tragedy, but Buffy taught me something today. And what do we think when I said Buffy the cheerleader? We may have thought, well, what's Buffy the cheerleader know? Not Dr. Adler. Everybody has something true to say about the nature of things. And he would listen. And Buffy the cheerleader taught him something that day. He said, oh well, live and learn. Live and learn. And so education is a lifelong process. He says you only have one certificate that shows your education is over. Not a high school certificate, not a college certificate, not your PhD. It is your death certificate indicates your learning is over. Then you can stop. Now, who knows, it might continue on after that. And he certainly hopes so and had that faith. And so, to be a lifelong learner, to see the enjoyment of that, to see the impact. And I'll leave you this one last thought. When I first met him and started working with him, he looked at me and he said, you know, for 50 years, I've been working on trying to reform public education in the United States with absolutely no results. I made no impact. But now, the last few years, I've started to see things begin to happen. You know, guys like me were showing up and saying, hey, you know something here. Help me do this. The Socratic method, original text, great idea. There are things starting to filter out there that he worked on. And I looked at him and I said, Dr. Adler, how does someone work on something for 50 years with no results? And he looked at me and said, well, do you want to do the right thing or do you want to do the wrong thing? I said, I'd like to do the right thing. Yes, I'd like to do the right thing. He said, well, there you go. It's the right thing to do. May you be blessed with that kind of insight, that kind of motivation, that kind of clarity. He would get frustrated, he would get angry, but you could not deter him. At the very end of his life, I was talking to him and I was explaining some reforms and some things that were going on in education, and he looked at me and said, I was born too soon. He just wanted to be in the fight, man. He wanted to be in the fight. And so we see right there in Genesis, God says, I've laid before you the blessing and the curse. Choose life. Choose life. And he chose it right to the very end. And so I think we're going to get the students, have a little break, people can stretch their legs, and then you come back and see a little Socratic seminar moderated in the way that Mortimer Adler would have done. Thank you. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We are going to examine this text right here. In a Socratic seminar with Dr. Adler, you can get a text, and we are going to look at this paragraph from the Declaration of Independence. So, what do these ideas have to do with anything? Truth, goodness, liberty, happiness. Okay, it's right there in this document. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go word by word, sentence by sentence here, and then collaboratively, we're going to use in the light of what they've read about truth and goodness, they should be able to answer lots of questions about happiness and other things because these things are connected. And so I will be asking questions. Listen closely. Take your time. This is not a game show where you've got to bring in. Okay? Thinking time. Pausing. You want to think about that a little bit more. Talk to one another. You see on the back there that it says, do I understand you to say? And the reasons you hold that position. Try to do that. We'll try to start doing that. We fail. We lose. We get excited so quickly. But we want to do that. And on the back it also says the virtues that good conversation needs. Adler says good conversation needs fortitude, courage. The courage to keep going when we irritate each other to death and you want to quit and stop talking and go home. Okay? Courage and fortitude. Whether it's in personal relationships, politically, it takes a lot of courage to do conversation, he says. Second is temperance. Control our emotions. Not get rid of them, but temper our emotions enough in a conversation. Finally, the most important, justice, that each person will be given his or her due. That idea that I disagree with what you have to say, but I would defend with my life your right to say it, he believed in that. He believed in that. So justice is very important, that we listen to, especially to ideas we disagree with. Okay, so let me give you a quick introduction. Listen closely. We are going to discuss the Declaration of Independence, a document that every American citizen should try to understand, and one, like other great works, which should be read carefully and discussed thoroughly in every school in this country. We will not be able to cover the whole Declaration of Independence, though it is only 2 pages long. It is too much to discuss thoroughly in our time together today. We'll devote our time to the first 5 lines of the second paragraph, beginning with the words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal," and so on. In those lines, almost every word counts, and that is why we should pay very close attention to all the important words. And it will require all of us to use words with maximum precision. This is difficult to do, and most people are not accustomed to doing it. In the questions I ask you, I will try to be as precise as possible in my use of words, and I will try to get you to be precise also in your use of words, so that we can achieve a clear understanding of the ideas expressed by these words. This is a very instructive exercise, and the Declaration of Independence is an ideal text to perform that exercise on. In the course of the discussion, difficult questions will confront us, to which none of us will know the answer. That is fine. Such questions are good questions, because they keep our minds actively engaged in the pursuit of answers. In this case, a close analytical examination of a very rich, very significant, and very difficult text. Now, with your help, I'd like us to examine the second paragraph of the Declaration word by word, because it's just that weighty and truthful. We hold these truths. The first word that stops us is the word truth. Now, you all use that word every day of your life. You say true or you say false. Now, I want you to think about the following. See if you could make a statement that everyone around this table and in the audience will immediately know is true. Take your time, a little thinking time. Think of a statement that you can make that everyone around this table and in the audience will immediately know is true. This one there, I can see your mind working.
I think I have something.
I thought so. All right.
Sure.
Make a statement that we all know is true.
So the first thing that comes to my mind is definitely, I think of Descartes, and I think I exist. So each of us in this room personally understands and agrees that they exist.
Okay? So, what makes that? I think that's correct. All right? Someone could be hallucinating. We could straighten them out very quickly. 2 people don't hallucinate at the same time, you know? And so there are certain pathologies. Okay? We exist. That's a pretty clear distinction, being and non-being. All right? Okay. What makes that true? Tougher question.
I mean, Descartes says, I think, therefore I exist. So you know you exist because you have thoughts, because you think, you have ideas. Your mind can create these ideas, and so you know that within yourself you exist.
Okay, I'll be Adler.
Sure.
Descartes just got you in trouble. You just proved you exist. To yourself. Here's a modern problem. Descartes lives in his own mind. He has proved in his own mind to himself that he exists. We have to make it that everyone in the room knows it is true. Now you were onto it, then Descartes messed you up. I'm being Dr. Adler. I'm being Dr. Adler. All right? So I'll be Dr. Adler for a second. I perceive, therefore I exist. I perceive you, you perceive me. Come on, Descartes, not that troublesome. I know. What if there was an evil God that he knew that, okay? But that everybody knows is true. I perceive you exist, you perceive that I exist. Okay? Somebody might be hallucinating. Okay? Now here's the tough question. What makes that true? It's a simple question, but a difficult question. We can say, yes, I'm with you. And Adler says, beyond a shadow of a doubt, I don't have to go to Descartes. I don't have to go to that much proof. He's trying to have the same proof as you would have in math. Aristotle. Adler says, we exist. I perceive. So I know I exist because I'm perceived. And I know you exist. You know I exist and everyone else. Now, what makes it true? So in that first chapter, he starts talking about what is truth. Descartes just trying to demonstrate to himself. And so he would say, very tricky, it's true because you exist. It's true because you exist. Okay? Remember, Aristotle says we think truly, Adler says, when we think that which is. We think truly when we think that which is, I think you exist. It was a good start, the existence. That's a clear distinction, isn't it? Okay? You exist. I think you exist. Yes, that's true. What's your reasoning? Because you do exist. I think you exist, and you do exist. Now let's keep going with this truth thing. It's very complicated. Make a statement that's false. Who else can make a statement that's false? Mr. Del Guidice. Yep. I just saw a flash into your mind. Can you make a false statement?
3 plus 2 equals 6.
3 plus 2 equals 6. Okay? We're in a decimal system. 3, okay? And everybody knows that's false. Why is it false?
Because it corrects the rule, or it contradicts like the rules of math.
What would be the true statement?
3 plus 2 equals 5.
Now, let's keep this in mind. What Adler's talking about is the correspondence theory of truth that we talk. Aristotle says, I think truly when I think that which is, and that which is not, is not. Okay? I think truly when I think that which is, and that which is not, is not. That is not the right answer. So I think truly. I think falsely when I think that which is not. And that which is not, is. Now in that statement by Aristotle, we start to begin to get this definition of whether our minds correspond to reality. Okay? So you could have said an obvious false statement is, Mr. Cathers has hair on his head. People would have said, yeah, you're not going to get any arguments for that, right? Okay? Then you say, no, I think Mr. Cathers has hair on his head. Then you think that which is, but it is not, you see. So we want to keep that in mind because we have this test to do with our thoughts. All right. Tough beginning, let's keep going. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Well, what's a self-evident truth? What's a self-evident truth? Mr. Z. I've just gone with Mr. Z instead of butchering your last name.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Well, I've got the text.
Yeah, go to the text.
Page 52.
Page 52. Let's go there. Give everybody just a moment. Page 52.
It actually starts at the bottom of 51 with truth called self-evident and continues on 52, saying that we recognize the truth immediately or directly from our understanding of what they assert. We are convinced, not persuaded of their truth, because we find it impossible to think the opposite of what they assert.
A self-evident truth, it is impossible to think the opposite. Impossible to think the opposite. You say, like, it's impossible to think Mr. Cathers has hair. No, I maybe just shaved my head and I could grow some. Right? So it's possible to think the opposite. Okay? No, I could grow hair. Whoa, okay. That wouldn't be self-evident, you see. Because someone could have thought, well, wait a minute. He doesn't have hair on his head right now, but it's not self-evident. Impossible to think the opposite. What are the examples he gives? Anybody remember the examples he gave?
The one he gave is that no triangle has any diagonals.
Okay. So he had to go through a couple of steps first on that. Now everybody will be able to follow this? All right? You say, no, I hate math. You say, stop that. Okay? Okay? Don't persuade yourself that there are things you can't understand. You can understand. Listen closely. I'll answer these questions to lead up to that. What is a triangle? A three-sided figure. What is a square? A four-sided figure. What is a diagonal? What is a diagonal line? A line that connects non-adjacent angles in a square. A diagonal is a line that connects non-adjacent angles in a plane figure. It is therefore self-evident that a triangle is a three-sided figure which therefore has no non-adjacent angles. It is therefore self-evident that there cannot be any diagonals in a triangle. Now, for that to be self-evident, you'd have to go over that. Go over the steps. See what he's talking about. Then eureka. You can't think the opposite. That took a few steps. But he has the other one. The part is less than the finite whole. If we order pizza and they bring it in here and we cut it into pieces, your part's going to be smaller than the whole. Well, how do you know? Get another pizza. What? Happened again. You see what I think he's got us on that, right? But I get another pizza. Well, maybe the 12th million one, my part will be. No. It's a relationship of parts to whole, that the part is less than the whole. It's impossible to think the opposite. Then he gave you one on the triangles. You've got to understand what a triangle is. You've got to understand what a square is. You've got to understand what a diagonal is. You've got to understand what adjacent angles are. But once you do that, aha, it's impossible to think you could have a diagonal in a triangle. And so therefore he's showing us two things. One, that you have immediate intuition about parts and wholes. Other arguments, especially in mathematics and other things, where if we establish a few things, then we can see that self-evident. Now let's go back. You didn't know that first line was so complicated, did you? That's why people argue about it all the time. Because they haven't taken time to really understand. We hold these truths to be self-evident. I'm telling you, this is not going to be a self-evident truth. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Now, why is that not self-evident? Miss Monin?
Yes.
Miss Monin, speak up. I'm getting something here. I'm listening. Why is we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal? Tell me why you think that's not self-evident.
Because in history we perceived it and seen men not being treated equally.
Okay, men have not been treated equally.
It's something that we've been able to see happen many times, that as a self-evident truth, it can't be something that we can't imagine it to happen. And we can see it happening because it has happened and it continues to happen.
Adler would say if something is true, it doesn't change. Our opinions might change. But if it were true at some time, during that time, so maybe we should say more about what the term equal means. Okay? We said people haven't been treated that way. Well, what's equal mean? See, now we're back to some key terms. They haven't been treated that way. Now let's go for descriptive truth and prescriptive truth that Adler talks about. You got one question here in front of you, then we'll get to the second one. First we'll do with equality. Then we'll get back to say, they may not have acted that way, but the question is, are humans equal? That's a descriptive truth. So Adler said, the first thing you have to say is, they say it's self-evident. Okay? It's self-evident. Well, some people have thought humans aren't equal. Then we say self-evident, you can't think the opposite? People have thought the opposite of this, haven't they? They've acted the opposite of that. So obviously it's not self-evident because people could think otherwise. They could think otherwise and have. And if it were self-evident, you wouldn't have that statement. People haven't acted that way. Now we have to talk about what is equal, okay? Now, let me see, let me borrow someone else's pen. Thank you. Too close. Everybody's got my pencil. Ah, there we go. All right, perfect. I use this one. Okay, so, are these two pins, I'm going to pretend this one's a little bit longer. I can't find my long pencil that I have here, all right? So pretend this one goes down there even at the bottom. Are these two pins equal in length?
No.
Mr. Liebler? Mr. Liebler, you said no, they're not equal in length, okay? Why not?
Because I look at them and I see that one's taller than the other.
That one's taller. This one has more length than this one.
Correct.
Well done. So what we have, you notice the simple insight. It has more, and this has less. Now, as Adler was showing with this question, we said, as we do in mathematics, equal in what aspect? Not identical, not the same. When we say equal, equal in what aspect? Length, we talked about. Everybody with me? Length. Because this one has more and this one has less. Are these two pins equal in length?
Yes.
Why?
Neither has more or less.
Very, and that is Ms. Bartlett, right? Ms. Bartlett. Well said. Precise in her words, Ms. Adler. Neither has more or less length. So with equality, we're talking about an aspect. This triangle is equal to this triangle because of the area of the triangle. Or it's equal because the angles are equal. Or this is in length. Are these two pins equal in color? Are they equal in length?
Yes.
So we're dealing with what aspect are you talking about with equality? Is everybody on that now? We've dealt with equality, okay? So, if two things are unequal in a given respect, when one is more or less, as you said, Mr. Liebler, in that one respect, when two things are equal, they are equal. Neither has more nor less in that one aspect, okay? That's the word, what the word equal means. Keep that in mind, because we haven't answered self-evident and these other things. Keep that in mind on equality. What aspect? Neither more than less of that aspect to be equal. Okay? Now, let's return to Jefferson. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. We have a little better understanding of equal. But that's not self-evident. People have thought opposite. And what word would make it more difficult for it to be self-evident? What one word? We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. What other word might people think differently on? Mr. Tom?
Created.
Created. You think you get a few arguments about created. That's not like parts and wholes of a pizza, is it?
No.
No. People will argue about whether humans were created. Okay? And so, now that's a belief that many of us have. That's a belief that many of us have. We're not saying that's false. We're not saying it's false that men were created equal. Okay? We're saying it's not self-evident. It's not self-evident. These are things people need evidence about or have faith about or argue about. All right, so now Mortimer Adler will say the following to you. Let's get back and let's rewrite Jefferson. Let's see if we can make it self-evident. Just for this exercise right here, okay? We have equal in mind. Mr. Top has told us if you use created, it's not going to be self-evident. Let's see if we can get there. We hold these truths to be self-evident. We know truth. We're thinking the way things are. So we're just saying it's not what I like. If I'm thinking humans are equal, I'm saying it is the case. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are by nature equal. Just in their human nature. Adler says, I'll leave created out of it for the time being. All right? Not saying that's false. We're trying to reach self-evident. We're trying to see if we can get something that people say, I'm having a hard time thinking the opposite of that. All right, now back to equality. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are by nature equal. Remember our pens. All right, whose pens do I saw? Okay. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are by nature equal, which means that all human beings are neither more nor less. All human beings are neither more nor less in what one respect. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are by nature equal. Can you think of in one respect that all human beings are equal? Existence. Okay? They exist. My dog exists. Good start, though. Everybody see what Ms. Bartlett was doing there? She's trying to find something self-evident. All right? Trying to find something self-evident. So, but existence, I might need some evidence. What one respect?
Human dignity.
Human dignity. Say more about that for me. What do you mean by human dignity?
That we all deserve. I mean, by
What?
and by human dignity, I mean that we all deserve equal, the same amount of respect and value.
I think the word, and you said human, so you see you took the dog out of it. I mean, we treat our dogs like human beings, right? And so human dignity. All right, I think we're on a track right here. That's a good guy. Try and find one thing there. Let's say some more about that. In what one respect can we make it that we're all equal? No more, no less.
If I could go on another.
Sure, you may.
that we're all deserving of the same chance to achieve something in life.
Okay? And why? What is it that we have? What is it that you have no more nor less than I?
We all desire happiness.
Because of this sameness, this equality, it's going to get there, right? I mean, look at look at what's fleshing out here. If we all are equal in some aspect, then we all are going to be deserving of a chance at the pursuit of happiness. If we're all equal in some aspect, Mr. Top, you had something else to add to this?
Our humanness or our species is the same. So I'm not scientifically adequate to
You
describe.
don't need science right now, this is just philosophy,
so-
I think, yeah.
Our
That's seeing the
humanness
big
is the
picture,
same.
yeah.
Yeah.
Our
We're the
humanness,
same species.
yeah. I like your first word, humanness. It goes to human dignity. Yeah, I think Adler would say, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men by nature are equal in their humanness. No one is more human or less human than anyone else. We may say, oh, that person's in the hospital right now and they're a vegetable. You say, no, they're not. They're a human being. And they have to be treated that way. Immanuel Kant would say that dignity that you're talking about there, Mr. White, that dignity is that we never treat another human being as means. See, this is a means to right. I have a car that I can drive in, a means. You said to Mr. Cathers, you had a driver that brought you here today. And if I just treated him as if he were just a part of the machinery, just a means to get me here, then I think Dr. Adler and Kant would have, you ignored his humanness. But he was a tremendous human being, engaged me in conversation, and, and so that's okay, he provided the service and was paid. So there we go. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that by nature, all men are equal in their humanness. No one is more or less human. And therefore, there is a certain dignity that humans deserve because of that. They are not things. And so Dr. Adler says that takes you to truth, goodness, and beauty we judge by. Liberty, equality, and justice we live by, and that regulates the I-thou relationship. The I-thou. Do you remember his saying that in there? You see? This is the I-thou. Robinson Crusoe, when he's all alone on the island, he doesn't have to worry about the I-thou relationship. Maybe truth, that will poison me, that won't. Now, once he gets his man Friday, I bet Friday's concerned about liberty, equality, and justice now. Once we're together. And so Dr. Adler says it's that I-thou. It's that human dignity that you were talking about. Certain dignity that we have. Okay? Well done. Let's keep going. All right. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these rights, say Jefferson, are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All right, let's take liberty. You've only read Truth and Goodness. Some of you have had a chance to read on. But his Truth and Goodness should shed light on what he talked about in the first two chapters on liberty. Listen to this question. When a man is justly accused, tried, convicted, and imprisoned, have we taken away his right to liberty? Remember, an inalienable right is one that government can't take away. You're born with these. Government should never take these away. These are rights that should be protected by governments. So now Adler asks you, when a man is justly accused, tried, convicted, and imprisoned, have we taken away his right to liberty or the exercise of his right? Or something else that you think? Think about that deeply for a second. Mr. Leibarger,
Yeah. I would
speak
say-
up so that everybody can hear you.
I would say you're taking away both.
You're taking away both.
Yes.
You're taking away his inalienable right and the exercise of the right.
Correct.
Well, government's not supposed to take away an inalienable right. And so let's think deeper about this. All right? Can you think of some ways? Inalienable, unalienable, Jefferson says here, inalienable right is something that's in your human nature, part of your human dignity, to be able to choose. Okay? So what do you think? Justly arrested, justly accused, everybody with me, there's no constitutional problems, you know, and so you don't have that. Yes, Mr. Thomas.
You've taken away his ability to exercise his liberty. He still has it, because if we look to Adler, if it's a truth, then it doesn't matter what we think about it or not, it's still there. So even though we've taken away his ability to exercise certain parts of his liberty, he's still endowed with the right to it.
Yeah, you said you've taken away certain liberties. What liberties couldn't we take away while he's in jail? You said we've taken away some. What ones did we not take away?
Well, he can choose to stay up all night if he wants, or he could choose to count to 10 for the rest of his life. He can make those choices.
Could the warden use him as a personal slave?
Well, technically, probably, yeah. We're not supposed to allow that in our society, but yeah, I would say.
That the warden could use him as a slave, his personal property. Would he lose that? Everybody understand the question? See, because you said he's given up. Let me ask that question first. Did we take it away or did he forfeit it?
Well, in our society, we say he forfeited it.
And why do you say in our society? Because these are the rules we're operating by.
Yeah.
Do you think we took it away or do you think he forfeited it? Remember, we said he's justly arrested, justly accused. I understand that innocent people are convicted all the time. Don't get me wrong. Okay? Then none of it would be just. Right? Okay. Everybody understand the question? Did we take it away or did he forfeit it? Okay. Anybody think that, no, the warden couldn't use him as a personal slave? Yes, Ms. Bartlett?
Because he could choose not to do those things. Like if the warden says you have to, mop the floor and wipe my mouth after I eat and et cetera, he can still not do that.
Would that be unjust for the warden to do?
To tell him to do those
To
things?
try to make him into a personal slave?
Yes,
Could he bring a lawsuit against him?
yes.
Yeah, he sure could. Okay? Now, I'm not saying horrible things don't go on inside of prison. I'm not saying everybody understands this in prison reform. But just think what Dr. Adler's saying about how you view these terms and how that can impact everything from how you live your lives to how you run prisons and that type of thing. Well, let me ask you this question. If he's justly arrested, justly accused, okay, and we say, okay, he forfeited the partial exercise. When he gets back out of prison, can we restore the full exercise of that right? Ms. Holliday?
You can absolutely, because you now have those rights granted to you that would have been taken away by being in a state facility.
Was the right taken away or the partial exercise?
The partial exercise of the rights.
You see what Dr. Adler's getting at here, you see. Obviously, of course, if the person's innocent was put in there, then everything's unjust. But we're talking about if it were justly done. Okay, now I ask you another question. This same man has committed a capital offense. We execute him. Have we taken away his right to life or the exercise of that right?
The exercise of that right.
So after we kill him, we can restore his right to
No.
life?
No. I guess both then, because he can't live if he's dead.
That's
And-
right.
And we take it away because we are the ones who execute.
This gets tricky, doesn't it? An inalienable right to life. We could see that one could justly forfeit the exercise, the partial exercise of a right, then that's restored. But if life is an inalienable right, and we execute you, then the right has been taken away. Okay? So you can see Dr. Adler has a question about capital punishment related to an inalienable right. Then people say, I don't believe all that stuff, you know? Okay. And that's not a position on capital punishment. Is everybody with me? It's not a position. It's a position on inalienable right and taking this seriously. Just get started. Let's move on.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, of course, anytime.
So Thomas Jefferson is saying that we hold these truths to be self-evident. I don't know if I can, right at this second, believe that it's self-evident that we have life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
No, I think that's what we were talking about. It's not self-evident.
Right, okay, so
Yeah.
it's not. We agree
Yeah.
on that, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, not self-evident. And so, that's wonderful, Ms. O'Mara. We will always want to come back. We want to come back. This is complex what we're doing, this kind of analysis word by word. Okay? And so, you see, let's take that word self-evident. You need no evidence. See, when I said we bring a pizza in, we cut it into pieces. See if your piece is smaller than the whole pizza. You're like, hmm? Well, maybe the next one will be different. Let's get more evidence in here. You don't need evidence. It's self-evident. But, Ms. O'Mara, what we're talking about is you would need evidence and arguments for all of these. You would need evidence and arguments. Dr. Adler is saying, no, it's not self-evident. People can think opposite. And so now, someone might say, no, I'm not with this. But Adler's saying, can we talk about this and discuss this in a way that brings it a little closer to self-evident? A little closer. Let's see about this. Do you think the right to life and the right to liberty are rights in exactly the same sense as the right to happiness? Now let's look at the whole thing. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, as arguments, Ms. O'Mara, on arguing for liberty, arguing for these things, giving evidence for those rights are in this book and many others, and you need to give evidence and people argue about this. But here's the question here now. As you look at that first sentence, do you think the right to life and the right to liberty are rights in exactly the same sense as the right to happiness? You don't have to agree that we have all the evidence yet. No. You're shaking your head, Miss Monin. Miss Monin, you think they're different? The right to life and liberty are different to the right to happiness?
Right, I think they're different because if we're using the same example of we tried and then rehabilitated person, I think that would be in the best interest for them to pursue their happiness further, a true form of happiness.
Interesting. You think that their pursuit of happiness, that taking away the full exercise of the right to liberty might assist in the pursuit of happiness?
Yes.
Okay, so I was trying to understand what you were trying to say there on that. And you said true happiness. And why do you hold that position? Your position is that someone might forfeit the partial exercise of liberty, be in jail for a while, and that would aid their pursuit of happiness, and the reasons you hold that position are?
I hold that position because even if they still feel that what they did was, for some reason, the right thing to do, and that has put them into jail. But hopefully at some point in their life, they come to realize that although what they did was not okay, that it was in their best interest to be in jail and to understand that in order to reach a greater happiness.
Do you
A
think
rewarded one.
that might be Dr. Adler talks about being able to understand real goods from apparent goods, and your wants and need, and you think that that might provide someone with the insight that what they were choosing were not real goods. Well, that seems to indicate, and the rest of you think about this question, that seems to indicate that life and liberty are means in the pursuit of happiness. Ms. Bartlett, you're shaking your head. You think life and liberty are means in the pursuit of happiness. How so?
You cannot pursue happiness if you don't have life and liberty. You have to have life, you have to have liberty to pursue your happiness.
Uh-huh. So those are means, and happiness is some kind of goal.
The end, yes.
Uh-huh. Or the end, as Adler would say. Okay? All right? So we have that crucial word, happiness. Serious business. With James Mason in Virginia, when James Mason in Virginia, in the state declaration, the preamble to the Constitution of the state of Virginia, Mason wrote that man has inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the attainment of happiness. Life, liberty, and the attainment of happiness. Jefferson changed it to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Turn your declaration over on this back there. You see two kinds of happiness. All right? I think you'll recognize that from Adler. Happiness one is what?
Needs.
Needs. Happiness two?
Wants.
Wants. Okay? So Adler says, let's think of two concepts here. Happiness is pursuing what you truly need. That's where truth comes back in again. Ms. Mortimer, you're talking about maybe the inmate will realize these are, I should not be pursuing these. I shouldn't have, these are not real goods, robbing banks. Okay? That I wanted to do that. I wanted that money. Adler would say that's not a real good. Not only will, I think he'd be right with you, not only will it get you thrown in jail, but you weren't pursuing happiness even if you get away with it because of the cost that it's driving you away from happiness. And that was very astute, very insightful that the pursuit of happiness might actually be aided there, which might think one should emphasize rehabilitation in prison then possibly, huh? One might think about that. After all, we get the name penitentiary from penance. To go pay penance. Seems like an innovative, progressive idea in the pursuit of happiness. Oh no, people might think we're soft on crime, but we tell them we're tough on happiness. I would tell my students, the ones who've been in trouble, they'd say, man, why are you sweating me all the time? Or why are you dogging me all the time? You know? And I'd say, because I love you. Love is the concern for the welfare of another. I want you to be happy. That's why I'm doing this. Why do you think I'm doing it? You know? And I'm telling you, it would stop them. It would stop them. You know? They didn't like it, still, but it was that idea of the means to the end. Okay? Now, you have happiness based on needs and happiness based on wants. If everyone is going to be in the pursuit, what must the definition of happiness be in here? Everybody gets to pursue everything they want, or everybody gets to pursue everything they need? What must it be if everyone's in it? That's almost self-evident, right? Now, if happiness is defined as I get what I want, then we're in trouble. And so then Adler starts spending some time on what happiness is. Now, if you were to take a piece of paper, let's see if we can make this clear. If you were to take a piece of paper and list the 10 things you need for the rest of your life, don't do it, just imagine it, everyone. A piece of paper and list the 10 things that you need for the rest of your life to pursue happiness. That you need, 10 things that you need. Think about that for a moment. So you had that list. You thought about it. You spent some time. The 10 things I need to pursue happiness in the rest of my life. Of course, you could spend a lot of time on that. Think about that later. 10 things I need to pursue happiness in the rest of my life. Now, you set that list down, and you have another list. 10 things I want for the rest of my life. 10 things that I want for the rest of my life. And everyone in the audience does the same thing. I collect them all. Give you time to do that. I collect them all. I have one stack. Here are all the needs lists. Then I have another stack. Here are all the wants. Do you think we would notice anything about those two sets of paper? Mr. White?
I think a majority of the wants would be similar to each other. And
The wants would be.
yes,
Okay? So, I want to learn how to play the violin. You want to learn how to play the violin?
no.
Okay.
But I think,
I want to become vegan. Do you want to become vegan?
no, but I think.
I don't want to become vegan either. I just had 2 steaks the last few days in Ohio, and you can't get those kind of steaks in Los Angeles. I'll tell you that. Okay? So you think the wants would be more similar than the needs?
I think that in talking about money and the excess of money,
Oh, I got you. In this society, everybody would be putting down money, fame, power. Oh, you might have a point about that, but that might just show that we're a very disturbed society.
I think like what you asked about with violin and vegan, that people have a wide variety.
Keep me on track.
A wide variety of wants, but that I think that our needs would be similar. I think we'd all be putting, nutrition and water and shelter, these types of similar things.
How about education?
Yeah.
How about health care? Is that a need? Okay, now.
I guess that depends upon your definition of, do you need to live, which definition of living is too.
Yeah, and so now, everybody see that just what we've done with this little bit, you could go back and look at these chapters. I'll just be Dr. Adler for a second. Health is a need. Okay? So we got life, liberty. Remember we have means to the end? Happiness? Okay. Why do you want wealth? So I can buy this, so I can do 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 that. Why do you want to do that? Sooner or later, he says you're going to get to be, so I can be happy. Why do you want health? Well, because then I'm going to be vibrant, I can do these things, I can be active, I can do this. Well, why do you want to be healthy? Why do you want to do those things? Adler says you're going to get to the end, so I can be happy. Why do you want to be happy? So I can be happy. You see why they call it the end? Okay? So Aristotle started that. That just, these are means to it. So here's a question to keep in mind. Dr. Adler says, I think we can say health's a need. Is health care a need? I will just be Dr. Adler. If you live in a society where health care is an instrument needed to keep you healthy, didn't have that in a primitive society, right? Okay, so everybody was equal in the sense that we hadn't had those advancements. That schooling, healthcare, these things can be instrumental to delivering those needs. Okay? Now, I just want to conclude here with a few statements to see what we just began to discuss here. And listen closely. We're going to read you some extraordinary statements from the great books, which will give you an understanding of war and peace and the importance of conversation. Machiavelli. You must recognize that there are two ways of fighting, by means of law and by means of force. The first belongs properly to man, the second to animals. But since the first is often insufficient, it is necessary to resort to the second. Therefore, a prince must know how to use both what is proper to man and what is proper to beasts. 1513 said that. Many centuries before, Cicero, the great Roman statesman, wrote these words, very close to the statement of Machiavelli's that we just read. There are two ways of settling disputed questions, one by discussion, the other by force. The first being characteristic of man, the second of brutes. We should have recourse to the latter only if the former fails. In 1706, John Locke said, and think of how parallel these statements are, there are two sorts of contests among men, the one managed by the law, the other by force. And these are of such a nature that where one ends, the other always begins. And so Dr. Adler would end by saying this to you. When men, meaning men and women, are in conflict about anything, in a family, or in a school, or in the state, or in world affairs, there are two ways of settling their disputes. If it can be settled by conversation, by talk, by law, you have peace. When the method fails, it is then you resort to force. So war begins when the method of peace fails. Just think about when we hear in world conflicts, talks have broken down. I want to thank all of you, Walsh University, our members of the audience, for practicing the method of peace with me today. May that method flourish and grow. Thank you.
Of course, I would like to thank Will Cathers for leading this discussion, to all of the members of the panel this evening. They did a lot of work in preparing and studying for it. And this conversation about the great ideas and the way in which tomorrow we will take up the discussion about the value, the importance, where and why these great ideas are so important. And we're also going to have the two student presentations, a little bit about the biography of Mortimer Adler. They will be discussing a little more information about who he was, what he meant. And with those two things in mind, I hope you will join us again tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. We're happy to be done now because that is less than 12 hours away. So, thank you very much, Mr. Cathers.
Thank you.